When doing watercolors for an illustration project, these are some of the strategies I like to teach my students. So we're not talking about watercolors like a landscape or a realistic kind of picture where we're blending images. This is where you're using watercolors to just sort of color in, but we will use some of the strategies that we do for regular watercolor painting. So I have an image here. We're doing this idea of a profile with inside outside, and it starts of course in pencil, and then we go ahead and trace in pen. Now you can go direct from pencil to the final painting, but this needs to be sealed because the pencil marks, because it's carbon, you can see that it smears, and if you were to use like yellow in this area, it will mix with the carbon and you'll end up with a green, or your oranges mixing with the carbon will turn out brown. So your colors won't come out true if you don't seal it first. So you can use fixative, you can actually use clear acrylic spray paint, which may affect the absorbency of the paper. And you can also use spray starch that is used on shirts and things for laundry. That's kind of cheap. Another option would be hairspray. That's the aerosol can hairspray, not the spritzing kind where you have to pump it. It has to be an aerosol can. So those kinds of things can kind of seal this so you can work on it. But normally I have my students go ahead and just re-outline in pen and then make sure they use an eraser because the carbon is still going to be there until you get rid of it. So one of the issues that I see students as they get ready is they grab far too many paintbrushes. I tell my students generally you only need about two, so one small and one medium. And if they have larger areas, they can grab one large one. So no more than 3 brushes each, and we share our brushes. And sometimes if we're going to do some splatter effects, we can use an old toothbrush, which can be dipped in paint and kind of flicked on there. And I'm gonna do that down in this area. So as we work on watercolors, we have some issues that we need to kind of deal with. So let's say that these are going to be, painted in stars and we have the background. The first mistake I see students do is they go ahead and they start, adding paint to the actual stars. So they start painting in the star, and then later on they have to do the background, and that means painting around every star, and that becomes difficult. I know we're all tempted to do the pattern first because that's kind of the fun part, and we forget about the background, and really it should be the other way around. You need to think about the background first before you do the foreground. And one of the things you can consider is what is the color of the stars and what is the color of the background. If your background color is a primary color, then you're going to save yourself some time, particularly if your star color or your pattern color is a secondary color, which can be mixed from your primary. So let's say that I do want to have orange stars, but I want to have a yellow background. Then that becomes a really easy kind of thing to do because I can use my large brush and just go ahead and paint right over the stars because we know that orange is already in yellow. So I would go ahead and use my large brush and just kind of paint in. And I do have the one star, so I will go around that. But all the other ones, I'm just gonna go ahead and, paint over. So, you fill the little pan with a bit of water, you brush it around with your brush, and then that goes pretty fast to kind of fill in your space. So the next thing I need to think about is what am I next to? So this is going to be bordering my bottom area. And if I want to have a color transition from this bottom area to this top area, to think about that transition color a little bit. So maybe I want to have a blend from one to the other, and I wanted to have some blue down here. Well, where they touch is going to be green because blue plus yellow is going to make green. So I might like that effect by letting this yellow stay wet and then going ahead and doing the blue down here and letting them touch. But if I don't want them to mix, then I have to wait for this area to dry before I do the blue and bring it right up into the line. For my case, I actually want it to blend. I like that idea a bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and start throwing in my blue, and I'm gonna do it right on that edge. And we're gonna see that one will bleed into the other, and I can kind of help it along by using my brush and kind of blending it up a little bit. And because it's wet, it's gonna be a nice transition of color. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish filling in my bottom area with blue. And while I'm doing this, the upper area is drying so that when I put my orange overlapping in there, it's not going to bleed into the yellow background, because the stars, I want them to be defined as, you know, a single color, and I don't want them to blend into the yellow background. So again, I'm using the big brush to kind of blend in, and I'm gonna try and blend away some of the blotchiness. Now, watercolors are, by nature, kind of blotchy. So, you know, don't feel like that's going to sort of hurt your grade or your assessment at the end of this, but do what you can to kind of minimize that. Sometimes you can even use just plain water as a way to kind of blend it out and kind of even things out. So don't always jump to color. You can sometimes just use clean water to help kind of blend that away. And now I have a nice transition, and I might even want to transition a little bit further by incorporating some purple into the bottom of this. So now I have this color change. Some of my students call it an ombre. And I'm gonna let it fade. And I'll go ahead and add some water to kind of blend that. So now I have a nice transition of color. And now this area is actually dry. In the time that I was just talking to you and doing the bottom, now I can go ahead, dab into my orange, and I can start coloring in these stars. Now, instead of reaching across the paper and then putting marks here or getting paint on my hand, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it around. What an amazing thing that we can do, is just turn something around. And now I can get into it and color in my stars. And I'm not getting any paint on my hand, and I'm not smearing my colors at all. Now, let's say you accidentally get a little bit of paint where you don't want it. So I'm gonna make a mistake on purpose here and put a little orange there. Very quickly, get some clean water, put it on top of that, and you'll see that it'll fade away. And you can grab a little tissue and blot that down. That'll take it off. Or if you don't have a tissue, you can clean your brush, squeeze your brush, and then that will act like a little sponge and clean it off. The faster you are to kind of cover mistakes, the faster they will go away. And you can see even here, there's a little bit of orange that escaped the star. So just go ahead and blend that, clean out my brush, squeeze it, and then that'll act like a little sponge and kind of pick it up. I'm not too worried about, you know, colors sort of escaping the edges. That's just going to happen as you use watercolors. But you can see by doing the background first and then doing the pattern on top of it, we can save ourselves a lot of time and make this go a little bit faster. Now, let's say we want to go into this stripe area. So I want to have different color stripes. So I want to do blue stripes and yellow stripes, just because I have those colors ready. And I would go ahead and very carefully do my edges first. A little bit more blue, and do the other side. And then I can do the middle. And fill in. Try and blend away the blotchiness as best I can. Now, while it's still wet, I like the idea of this being darker going to light. So I'm gonna go ahead, maybe not darker, but more intense. I'm gonna add some more intense blue here. And then let it kind of fade out. Let the brush run out of paint. And now I'm gonna get some clean water, rinse my brush, and then just use that to kind of blend away the edge. So now it's going from intense to less intense. So it's a monochromatic color change. Now, a lot of students want to jump right to the next one, but if this is wet, remember that the color here will bleed into this color, so it's better to let it dry. So you can hit it with a hair dryer, or if you happen to know that you have other areas of blue, like I want this stripe blue, go ahead and do that. And because these two are not touching each other, we're not going to have a problem with color bleed. So what I often will tell my students to do is use the one color, pop around the canvas or the paper to the different areas where that color is going to be, and then you won't have a problem with one color bleeding into another. So by the time I'm done with this blue area here, the previous blue area will probably be dry enough that I could put a color neighboring to it and not have a problem. Now, I've been painting for 30 years. I can get away with using a big brush like this to kind of fill in areas because I know how to use the edge of the brush to do thin areas, the fat of the brush to do thicker areas. But for this little circle, I wouldn't use this brush. It's kind of like using a sledgehammer to do the job of a thumbtack. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab some of that blue with a smaller brush that's more appropriate for this particular area. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Okay. Then I'm going to intensify here. So I'm going to get some intense blue. Put that in. And fade it with some water. Okay. So while I was working, I got a little splatter over here, but actually that's going to work for me. Now, if I wanted to clean it up, you know what you need to do. You just smear it around a little bit, squeeze off your brush, use it like a sponge, and that'll kind of pick it up. It won't 100% disappear, but it'll mostly disappear. Now I'm ready. If this is dry, then I could do another color here and not have a problem with it bleeding over. Last thing I'm going to do is a little bit of splatter on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it around, and I want to protect the other areas so that I don't affect that. So I'll grab a scrap piece of paper, and down here I wanted to have some splatters in kind of a purple color. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of purple using my toothbrush. And I'm going to cover this up so I don't get some splatters in areas I don't want. Now I have to be careful because it's going to create this sharp edge. So I'm going to, as my brush runs out, I'm going to be able to get a little bit closer and kind of play around with that. Now the other thing you could use is blue tape going along an edge if that is something that you have available to you, but I don't mind a little bit of splatter happening in the outside area. Now, if we're using watercolors, your fingers will get colored, but you go ahead and use some soap and water and that'll come off. So those are some simple strategies that you can use if you're doing an illustration project with watercolors.